There we go.
Excellent. Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being there in person or online. And I thought I would start. Hold on. Oh, my presentation just opened in front of my face. Hold on. Let me move that over a little bit. I just wanted to start. I'll introduce myself. I'm going to give just a short overview of the current research that I do and what projects I'm working on. I'm going to go through, you asked a whole bunch of really great questions, so I'm going to go through and answer your questions. And then if we have time, then we will open it up for other questions that pop into your mind as you're listening. So I work, my name is Briana Pobiner. Let me start backing up there. I work at the Smithsonian Institution at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. Behind me, this is my home office. I'm actually not in the museum right now because of the government shutdown. I am working from home, but I am still able to work, which is great, as a non-federal employee. Anyway, I'm an archaeologist. And so I'm particularly interested in what people ate a long time ago. And there's lots of different ways to study that. So if you were trying to figure out, let's say, what the person sitting next to you ate for breakfast yesterday, this is how we start to think about, like, how do you figure out what people ate a really long time ago? You might look at things like, okay, what dishes did they leave in the sink, or what silverware, sort of what tools did they use to eat? What garbage was thrown in the garbage? I sometimes joke as an archaeologist, I spend a lot of time just digging up garbage. So what wrappers are in the trash? What kind of, what other kind of food is in the trash? What food got actually stuck on their teeth if they forgot to brush their teeth? Or what food is actually in their stomach? So we, as archaeologists, think about what things preserved a long time ago. Tools or like, what dishes are in the dishwasher. Your dishes, your silverware might preserve. You actually, if you didn't brush your teeth, you might get some like little bits of food stuck on your teeth that can actually preserve for millions of years, that can give us direct evidence of what people ate. And the garbage, some of it preserves. Your plastic wrappers won't preserve, but, bones might preserve. And so that's what I study. I study the bones of animals that people have used ancient stone knives to butcher with. So I'm going to share my screen, but let me first actually get to the presentation mode. Oh, sure. Now this is right in front of my face. Hold on. Keeps doing that. Hold on. No. All right, hold on. I got to close this first. Too many windows. Here we go. Hold on. Presentation. I'm going to present this window. Okay. Let me see what happens if I do this and then I do this so that you can, are you seeing my whole slideshow, or does it have like little notes on the side? Whole slideshow. Perfect. Okay. So let me start here. So I am a research scientist, and I also do a lot of outreach and education. But I really want to talk about the research part of what I do now and sort of what my questions are. So you can see there's a big saber-toothed skull in that picture. I am trying to figure out who ate stuff a long time ago. Sometimes that is when people are eating things, but also sometimes it's when predators ate things. And so I'm particularly interested in meat eating and when people started eating animals and what big predators they were competing with, maybe what predators they were scavenging from. And so how do I do that? I do that by looking really closely at bones and looking for the sort of the telltale signs of who ate an animal. So you can see in this picture, there are tool marks on the left-hand side. So that is actually a 1.5 million year old fossil antelope leg bone from a site in Kenya. And those little marks are left by ancient stone knives. And I know that because I've done a lot of sort of replica experimental butchery with similar stone knives to see what the shape of those marks are like. So I look for tool marks, but sometimes I also look for tooth marks, mostly by big predators. So when our ancestors were eating meat 1 million, 2 million years ago, there were also the ancestors of lions and leopards and cheetahs and hyenas and jackals and saber-tooths even, who aren't around today. That bone on the right is the leg bone of a zebra that I saw lions eat in Kenya. And so I do also research today with predators to figure out what does it look like when they chew on bones. And so some of the projects that I'm working on now, I have a long-term project in a wildlife conservancy in Kenya. It's kind of like a big national park where there's lots of wild animals. And I'm studying, you can see what it looks like on the left, at least in sort of the open grassy areas, walking around looking for kind of bones of animals that have died recently, and then studying those. So you can see that on the right to still try to figure out what does it look like when different predators chew on bones, and can I find those chewing patterns in the past? I'm also studying fossils from a bunch of different places. One is from an excavation in Kenya that is run by us at the Smithsonian as well as the National Museums of Kenya. So there we're digging up fossils. You can see me on the left-hand side in the middle, sitting on an excavation. We're digging up fossils to figure out what, who ate those fossil animals a long time ago. And on the right-hand side is me in the museum, in the main museum in the capital of Kenya, studying some of the fossils that we've excavated. This project is a little bit different. This is a project studying ancient human footprints in Tanzania. So I'm also interested in sort of what people were doing when they were foraging out looking for food. And so this is a site where this amazing set of hundreds of ancient human footprints, maybe about 15 or 20,000 years old, were left. And so I've been working there for quite a while. But all of my other projects are really still about who ate what. So I'm studying the fossils from a cave in Texas. It looks like it was a place where saber-tooths were actually bringing animals back to kind of feed their babies. So we want to see what saber-tooth chewing looks like. I can't study saber-tooths today. They're not around anymore. But I can study what we think the marks that they left on animals in the past. This is a project that I actually finished that I started in 2017. I was looking at the actual ancient humans themselves to figure out who might have eaten them. And this was a really big surprise to me because I was expecting to find marks from predator teeth. But instead, actually, on one of those fossils, I found butchery marks by other humans. So this is one of the earliest examples of cannibalism, which I know there were a couple of questions about. This project that I joined in 2019, we published our first paper on this last year. And this is a site in Romania where the fossils were excavated 50 or 60 years ago. We went back to study the fossils to look for some of those butchery marks, and we found some. And those fossils are almost 2 million years old, and they're some of the earliest evidence for people, ancient people in Europe, anywhere. And then this is the last photos that I have. This is another site in Europe, in the Czech Republic. This is a place where it looks like people were spending a lot of time hunting big mammoths. And there were also reindeer that were there that have chewing marks because it looks like people were maybe hunting reindeer to feed their dogs. And so we're trying to figure out, like, what does it look like? Are these some of the earliest dogs? Are they still wild wolves? So we're studying the bones to see what those kind of wolf or dog chewing patterns look like. Yes, and that is all on my show. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, stop presenting. There we go. So that's kind of an overview of what I'm working on right now. And now I'm going to just turn right to the list of amazing questions that you all sent in. And I've sort of grouped them into questions that sometimes the questions were a little bit similar, or grouped them into themes. There were a couple questions about my job. There was a question, why did I decide to have this job? What experiences do I have? And what have I learned from my job? So I decided to do this job because I find it really interesting. I really enjoy doing it. I kind of like solving mysteries. And so I get to kind of decide the research questions that I ask. The experiences that I have, I get to study fossil collections. I get to go do field work. I get to excavate. I get to study bones in a modern wildlife conservancy. And what I've learned from doing this job is that people were eating animals starting millions of years ago. Another set of questions are, is it fun identifying all the bones? It is super fun. I really like I said, it's sort of solving mysteries. When I get a piece of a bone that I'm like, I don't know that I know what this is, but maybe I can figure it out. That's where our amazing museum collections come in. So I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what these bones are. And I go to sort of bone libraries, to museum collections, to the bones of animals that we know, and I make those comparisons to see if I can identify the pieces. Usually the fossils are not complete. What's my favorite part of paleontology? I like that question. Sometimes it's hard to pick. I really like doing the field work. I really like going out and being with the wildlife and looking for bones, or looking in the fossil assemblages to see if I can find those butchery marks. Someone asked a great question. What do you do to identify the purpose and use of an artifact? And what do we look out for? That's a big question. That's a really good question. A lot of times we can look at the sort of the edge of the artifact and figure out if there's sort of wear on it that we know was used for something in particular. Sometimes we like replicate making of the artifact and using it and seeing what artifacts are particularly useful for certain things. Someone asked, have I seen Tumai, which is one of the oldest ancient human skeletons, or any other famous skeletons or bones? And I haven't seen Tumai. That's a skeleton from Western Africa, but attending conferences in particularly in Eastern Africa, I have seen the famous skeleton called Lucy. I have seen the Turkana boy. I have seen a lot of the, being a scientist and going to these conferences, I've gotten to see a lot of the original fossils, which has been very exciting. There were 3 questions that were kind of similar. What's one of the most interesting specimens I recently found? What's my biggest discovery? And what's my favorite discovery? And the one that I talked about, where I was looking at the ancient human bones, expecting to find animal tooth marks, but actually finding butchery marks from early humans. That's probably my favorite discovery because it was a big surprise. And that bone had been discovered in 1970. And until I looked at it in 2017, nobody noticed those marks before. Everybody else who was studying it was looking at the size and the shape and trying to figure out which early humans it was from. But I looked very closely with my magnifying lens and I saw something that nobody had seen before. So that was exciting. Someone asked, how do you figure out a fossil's diet? It's a great question. So I talked a little bit in the beginning about those different ways that we can figure that out. Also, the food that we eat kind of gets incorporated into the chemistry of our bones and teeth. So we can look at the chemistry of fossil bones and teeth and get a sense of what kinds of plants people were eating, or were they eating a lot of meat or only a little bit of meat? Here's a good question. How much has the diet of very early hominids to Homo sapiens changed? The answer is quite a bit. I'm actually working on a proposal to write a book about that right now. The short answer is we eat a lot more kinds of foods probably than very early hominids, like our earliest ancestors did. There's a question about, how did early Homo's digestive system work? Because we don't have soft parts like our digestive systems that have preserved, we don't know for sure. But we think probably very similar to ours, just that some of the proportions of the organs might have been a little bit different. And someone asked, why would early human cut into their prey bones? What's good there? So the cuts were actually by accident. It was probably mostly from people trying to scrape meat off of bones in order to eat the meat, or to cut apart animals in order to carry a piece somewhere so that they could eat it safely, or maybe they could cook it. Big question. Do early humans eat more meat or more plants? We do not know the answer to that yet. Probably more plants. Modern humans, we can only eat a certain proportion of meat in our diet before it starts to have kind of negative effects on our health. So we think probably mostly plants, but different early human species might have eaten more or less meat. And how do we know when we first started eating a more varied diet that included plants and not just meat? It was probably actually mostly plants and then adding meat. And the way that we know that is from the animal fossil bones that have those butchering marks in them. There was a question, when did humans first make fires and cook food over them? The earliest evidence we have right now is that about 1 million years ago. That's when we really start to see like campfires that are very clear to see in the archaeological record. And when did people start hunting? That's a good question that is very hotly debated in archaeology. I think the best evidence is about 500,000 years ago, about 500,000 years ago, we start to see people be able to basically choose which animals that they're hunting. We start to see archaeological sites with all of one species of animal or all of just, adult animals. So they're not just picking off the more vulnerable animals. It's, we're going after the big animals. So that it gives us the clue of when people probably started actually hunting. This is a really good question. Did hominids of the past have any way of getting dental hygiene? Sometimes I joke it's a good thing they didn't have toothbrushes because then we wouldn't find those direct evidence of plant bits on their teeth. But interestingly, there have been sort of grooves in teeth of different hominids that people have interpreted as basically from toothpicks of like sharpened sticks that people were trying to pick food out of their teeth. And sometimes there's even little bits of plants stuck in there. So maybe people sort of used sticks as toothpicks. Another question, did Homo erectus communicate with words? We don't know the answer to that. The origin of language is a really interesting question that we really only have indirect evidence for. My guess is that they probably didn't have the same kind of complicated language that we do, but I bet that they were pretty good communicators. Like we even see other living primates have like different vocalizations and different calls to mean different things. What's the most recent hominin discovered? So the most recently discovered species, I think, is a species called Homo luzonensis, which is only found at the island of Luzon off the coast of in the Philippines. So that was only discovered a couple years ago. And that same person asked, do I like ammonites? I actually love ammonites. My first ever fossil experience was before I got interested or had experience with human evolution. I actually did field work studying ammonites in the Midwest of the US. So I do love ammonites. A couple more questions. How could we have survived between 6.3 and 4.5 million years ago? And in parentheses, with so little fossil remains. I think the issue is not so much how did we survive? There's not a lot of evidence. It's why is there so little evidence? And so I think archaeologists are really interested in finding sediments from that time period, sort of the earliest part of our evolutionary history, to look for more fossil remains. And the trick is that it looks like before about 4 or 5 million years ago, most hominids lived in more tropical kind of environments with lots of trees. Those environments tend to have soil that's very acidic, which doesn't preserve bone very well. So it could be that hominids were living there, but we don't have any good evidence of it just because their bones didn't preserve. The last two questions I got were, how much time does evolution take? That's a great question. And the short answer is it depends. Sometimes it can take a relatively short amount of time. In humans, we see actually the best example of recent human evolution is that about a third of us on the planet today can digest milk as adults. We're called lactose tolerant. Most people cannot. They're lactose intolerant. The mutations that cause lactose tolerance only are found in ancient human skeletons starting about 5,000 years ago. That's actually very quick. And now, like billions of people on the planet can digest lactose. It's the strongest example of natural selection in modern humans really that we know of, at least as far as our diets and health. And evolution in something like bacteria can happen almost in front of our eyes. It can be very, very quick. And so, but evolution, because it is change over time in a population, it's basically like when traits, the spread of different genetic mutations that make different traits spread over time. It depends on how long our generations take. So our human generations are maybe 20 or 30 years. So for there to be a big change within a species can sometimes take hundreds or thousands of years. And for a species to change, on average, mammal species in the paleontological record last for about 1 million years. So it can take, sometime around that time, a little bit less for new species to evolve. That's just within mammals. And then last question, why did we evolve and other apes not? Actually, other apes are just as evolved as we are. So we share a common ancestor with living chimpanzees and bonobos. They're our closest cousins, but sort of like we share like a great grandparent kind of common ancestor. But chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, pretty much everything on the planet has evolved just as much or for as long as we have. We just happen to evolve in some way, like in some directions. And chimps are are really good at being chimps, and gorillas are really good at being gorillas. They're very successful. And so there's not the same kind of selection pressure on them to evolve in the same direction in a sense that we have. So I think I was able to cover all of the questions, and I think we have a little bit more time. So maybe if there's other questions, Mr. Amster can help facilitate those.
Yeah, so we've got a couple students that have demonstrated an interest. First of all, I think we definitely want to give a round of applause. That was amazing, wasn't it?
It was great questions, everybody. Well, thank you.
And if you guys just want to come up one at a time and just give the person space to ask the question. You can ask multiple questions if you want. Just give everyone a turn.
My question is, when and why did we start cooking meat, and when did it become poisonous to eat raw meat?
Oh, good question. So when and why did we start cooking meat, and when did it become poisonous to eat raw meat? So the second question is, it's actually not. So we can eat raw meat. So there are, sort of cuisines that include raw meat today. It's often called tartare, like steak tartare. And so when did we start cooking it routinely? So we see the beginning of cooking of meat and fish, actually, and other animals going back about 1 million years ago, probably more routinely cooking starting about 500,000, 500,000 or 300,000 years ago. The why, though, is a good question. The why questions are harder to answer about the past. And whether it was just people seeing natural forest fires and coming in afterwards and going, oh, okay, this tastes pretty good. We don't really know why, honestly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How much different was the climate when Homo erectus lived?
Great question. How much different was the climate when Homo erectus lived? Well, Homo erectus lasted from about 2 million years ago to maybe as recently as, 100,000 years ago. So that species is the longest lived one on our family tree for almost 2 million years. So the climate changed a lot over that time. And Homo erectus lived from across Africa all the way into Southeast Asia. So the climates were probably really different in different times in different places where Homo erectus lived.
Thanks. I was wondering if you know, you have an estimate on how many fossils you worked on.
Oh, that's a good question. How many fossils have I worked on? I know that from just one site in Kenya where I have been working for about 20 years, I have studied more than 100,000 fossils. So probably maybe 100 and probably 120, 130,000 maybe total. So a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, so you are a history detective, basically?
Yes, basically. So like a dietary detective, sort of a history, exactly. Yeah.
I've got two, one for me and one for my friend. The first one is mine is
what is like how much can you tell / how much is preserved inside a fossil's bones? Chemicals that can tell you about the diet, like the chemicals or other stuff, inside the bones. Does the outer bone like serve as a protective layer?
So yes, and actually because when bones fossilized, basically they get mineralized where one mineral replaces another, but that chemistry, there's at least two sort of chemical systems that we can look at. One tells us what kind of plants we ate, whether they're grassy plants or leafy plants, and the other tells us how far up the food chain we were eating. So actually, those are often preserved very well in fossil bones.
So inside bones, yeah, that's cool. And then my friends did hominids ever change their diets or like change something new during their lifetime? Like, was it just such like a subtle, like evolution that it's like there was never like a hominid being like, okay, I'm gonna go hunt like a deer now or something.
Yeah, good question. So like how, was there ever sort of a spontaneous diet change? Probably. We might be able to see that. So you can look at sort of the change over the life of a tooth in your mouth and see like how your diet changed over time. And so we might not be able to see like one individual instance of eating a certain kind of food, but we might be able to see things like there is a different chemical sort of chemistry system where you can show that like maybe humans migrated to one place and ate food there and drank water there and then migrated to another place. So we definitely think that there was a lot of like seasonal changes in diet when migrating animals were coming through. And we can see some of that sometimes in the chemistry of our bones and teeth.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, what was the first human species to domesticate animals?
The only human species to domesticate animals was us, Homo sapiens. And the oldest evidence for domestication goes back maybe as much as about 30,000 years with the domestication of the dog. So our best friends humans' best friends were our first domesticated animals. And actually the first domesticated plants were probably gourds, plants sort of like related to pumpkins and things that were probably used for storage. So interestingly, the first plants and animals to be domesticated were not for food. They were for companionship or for storage. But then starting about 10,000 years ago, you get domestication of lots of different plants and animals.
Thank you. Also, my friend had a question. Is it true that Homo erectus built boats?
That's a good question. Did Homo erectus build boats? I am a little bit skeptical about that idea. I don't know that we have we certainly don't have evidence of the boats themselves. My guess would be probably not. I don't think we have good evidence, honestly, of any species other than ourselves building boats, probably.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a question. What is your favorite hominid?
Oh, probably my favorite hominid is Homo erectus, because for a couple of reasons. They're the first species to start eating a lot more meat. They're the longest lived species on our family tree. So I know they're now extinct, but they're sort of like an evolutionary winner. They're also the first species that we know that migrated out of Africa and spread throughout the world. So they're sort of like these pioneers.
Thank you.
You said you found evidence of cannibalism. Why do you think the first hominid to do that was?
Yeah, so the evidence that I found is maybe some of the earliest, and that was, we don't know what hominid got cannibalized because it's only a piece of a leg bone, so we're not sure. There were 3 different species around at that time, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and one of the Paranthropus species, so I don't know. The only species that we find cannibalism besides ours happening on a regular basis, though, is Neanderthals, which are kind of these extinct cousins of ours.
So you answered like when did humans start cooking meat, but like when did they start eating meat without being cooked?
So cooking happened about starting 1 million years ago, but the meat eating went back to more than 3 million years ago. So we have butchery marks on good evidence of butchery marks on fossil bones by about 2.9 million years ago now. Maybe some evidence older. So yeah, 2 million years of eating raw meat, it looks like, before cooking.
How did humans discover like how to make fire?
Yeah, that's a good question that we don't know the answer to, because it's one thing to sort of see fire happen in a wildfire and maybe like sort of keep it alive, but we don't know when exactly or how humans figured out how to make fire. Good question.
How fossils like I know how that's fossils like stay like underground or like in some place for a while. How long can they stay without like being in like a proper research center, like without like rotting or anything?
Oh, yeah. So how long can fossils stay around before they're sort of get weathered and destroyed? It really depends on what the environment is like. So sometimes if fossils are in sediment that's slowly eroding, they can sit on the ground surface probably for decades. But sometimes weathering rain and cold and wind can actually sort of erode them away. We don't know how long that process takes, but probably within, I don't know, a couple of decades that you could get fossils totally eroding away. Good question.
Another question I have is I know how you like dig up fossils and things like that. Is there any certain places you look, or are you just like randomly like trying to find them?
Yeah, awesome question. How do we know where to find fossils, basically? So we go to places where people have found them before. We go to places that the sediment or the dirt is the age that we're interested in. So we use geological maps, so maps of where geologists, kind of earth scientists, have gone and mapped how old the sediments are. And so you need the right kind of sediment and the right age of sediment and places where erosion is actively happening, so the fossils will be coming out.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
I have a question for myself and two of my friends.
Mhm.
My question is, what were the differences between the diet of a child and the diet of an adult?
Ooh, so the diet of a child and an adult, probably like our babies today, the babies a long time ago would have just started drinking mother's milk. And then after they got to be old enough, they would have probably started eating basically the same things that adults do, kind of like we do today.
So one of my friend's questions is, when did hominids start hunting fish?
Ooh, so the earliest evidence for that goes back 700,000 years ago from a site in Israel where we see the first fish cooking. Actually, that's what let us know that the fish were being hunted.
And the other question is, can you break down a day in a life at work for you?
Oh, yeah, a day in the life. So one of the things I like about my work is that every day is a little bit different. Some days I am in Kenya studying fossils. Some days I am in front of my computer at the Smithsonian writing a grant proposal, or right now I'm working on writing a book, or I might be talking to a school class like I am today, or earlier this morning, I had a meeting. We're going to be training new volunteers to help work in one of our exhibits. So every day is a little bit different, but that's a big part of why I like it, actually.
I have one question for me and then one question from somebody who didn't get parental allowance to talk. My question is, why were there so little hominids during certain periods in time?
That's an amazing question that I don't know that we know the answer to. It either could be that the population levels of those species were very low, or that they were living in places where they didn't get preserved as well. So we don't know the answer to that yet.
That's fun. My second question is, when do you travel and how much do you do it?
Yeah, so I travel a lot in the summer, mostly because the places where I do field work in Kenya and Tanzania, it's actually sort of their winter. So it's like a cooler time of year and it's a dry season. Also because I work with a lot of college professors and they have off in the summer, they're not teaching. So when I work with other colleagues, I tend to do a lot of my travel in the summer. I go to conferences at different times during the year, though, and sometimes I spend a little time in Kenya in January when it's nice and warm there.
That's really cool.
I also have some questions for people who didn't get permission. One of them is, what is the oldest fossil you have worked with?
Ooh, so that's probably one of the, when I was doing my PhD research, I worked on an excavation at a site called Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. And we were excavating sort of fossils from the bottom of an ancient lake that was almost 2 million years old. So actually a lot of hippo fossils. They were very cool pink colored hippo fossils. So those are probably the oldest fossils that I've worked with.
That's cool. And then another one was what does it mean to be like a younger archaeologist with like less experience? Like, do you get jobs? Do you work? How do you gain experience in that form of that field?
Yeah. So how do you get experience as an archaeologist? There are
Like, other than taking classes, like your first job.
Exactly. So a lot of times you can do an internship. So it's sort of like work experience as you're a college student. You can do an internship over the summer. You might be able to do one during the school year. If you're in school near like a museum or someplace, you can get an internship. So that's a really good way to get your foot in the door. And that can often lead to your first job. A lot of archaeologists work in what's called contract archaeology, where you're working for a company that does survey and excavation if somebody's building a building, moving a highway, doing some kind of like construction project. So that's a good way to kind of start off as an archaeologist.
Nice, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question. Like, so for the cannibalism, you said there's 3 species of humans around, and would they like have fought each other? Like,
Yeah, good question.
Is it for the cannibalism?
Yeah, so we don't know. Sometimes when we find butchery marks on these early human bones, we don't know if they're for members of the same species, that would be cannibalism, or a different species, and that would be more like competition. We don't have any evidence of really battles or fighting each other, though, until you get to our species, and really until you get to things like the beginning of cities where you have a lot of people. So it seems like it's really, once you get to big populations, that's where people start to think about warfare. So, but we don't have any evidence that hominins before us had any kind of warfare.
Somebody else had a question, like what does it look like when a hominid has plants in their teeth?
Yep. So it could, so if you, when you brush your, actually even better, when you go to the dentist and they use a little dental pick to scrape the, what's called the plaque or the tartar off your teeth. Basically, if that plaque stays on your teeth, it gets hardened and it just looks like a little, it's kind of a film. It's like a very thin film made of bacteria and bits of food. So it's almost invisible, but.
So they are about to have the bell ring, but I'll turn off the recorder and then we can, if you have more time, I'm sure they would. But I think I speak for all the students and say that we had a great time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your great questions.
Let's see, where's that record? There we go.